Hi, and welcome to Explore a Story. I'm Emily Grassley, coming to you from the Field Museum in Chicago. On this podcast, we're going to explore a few different themes. Our last episode highlighted one of the many cool jobs one can have working in a museum and featured Kate Golumbetsky from the Public Relations Office. She talked about that time she impersonated a Tyrannosaurus Rex on national television in Japan, and it is really worth a listen, so make sure to go check out that episode. But today, I want to talk about mistakes. Personally, I don't think we talk about mistakes enough. I think they're important for the learning and discovery process, and it's how we grow and better understand how things work. The same goes for mistakes in science. If I'm going to be super cheesy about it, you could say something like, mistakes are just opportunities in disguise, and print that on a rainbow banner and hang it in your classroom. Anyway, today our episode is with paleontologist Dr. Ken Angielczyk. He's an associate curator here at the Field Museum and studies extinct mammals and their relatives. Ken has worked in amazing places all over the world and made some really important discoveries, but things don't always go as planned, and, sometimes that's okay. Oh, and when he mentions Sterling Nesbitt, that's a scientific collaborator who's a paleontologist and associate curator at Virginia Tech. Let's go to the interview. Can you tell us about the broken turtle?
So the specimen that we're talking about is a turtle specimen, a fossil turtle that's about 9 million years old. That was collected at what's called the Black Hawk Ranch in California. It's on the flanks of Mount Diablo in the Bay Area. And that's a specimen that belongs to the University of California Museum of Paleontology. Originally, the specimen was basically a complete turtle shell. So it had the upper shell, the carapace, and the lower shell, the plastron, still articulated, and it was filled in with sediment. Mm-hmm. So basically like a turtle shell kind of full of dirt. And so I asked the collection manager at the University of California, Berkeley, to send the specimen to the Field Museum. And she sent the specimen to us kind of in the mail in a box that was kind of like wrapped up in bubble wrap and things. And at some point during shipping, the specimen got broken.
Oh, no.
So instead of like a turtle shell full of dirt, it was now sort of like part of a turtle shell and then like a bunch of dirt stuck on the bottom shell.
Oh, so when you opened the box, you're like, oh, sweet, I got my fossil turtle in the mail, and you open it up and you look in there. Did you know immediately that it was broken?
Yeah, well, you couldn't tell when the box was all wrapped up, but on opening it, yes, it was pretty obvious that things were kind of in pieces and there was kind of like bits of dirt kind of falling off and stuff. So.
Is this a thing that happens? I mean, fossils seem pretty fragile. Is it normal that one would be broken in shipping?
It's something that we try to avoid as much as possible, but it is something that happens.
So it wasn't like you opened it and you were like, oh no, I'm going to be fired or anything like that?
No, it's nothing like that. As long as you can sort of repair the thing and get it back into shape, it's usually okay. And so I thought maybe we could take advantage of this and kind of try to clean up what was inside and see if there's any additional bones that happen to get preserved in the shell. And so our preparators here at the museum removed the sediment, and there were some limb bones, part of a pelvis, part of the shoulder girdle, so like the shoulder blades and things in the shell. And right at the front of the specimen, there's about 2/3 of a skull and most of the neck.
Whoa.
So the way the specimen was preserved, like the front end of the skull, the snout got broken off, but it was literally right up against the sort of edge of the sediment that was inside. So it was like literally just under the surface, and no one had realized that. So it actually has turned into a much more useful and much more important specimen because we have almost the whole animal as opposed to just the shell.
That's awesome. So do you think that anybody would have ever, if it hadn't come broken, been able to find the skull and the specimens inside, or the bones inside?
It would have been more difficult to do, and I don't know if people would have necessarily kind of had much impetus to do it, so it may have been ignored for kind of considerably longer. And it would have been more difficult to really get in there and kind of try to prepare things the way we did.
So you might have had to break it open anyway.
So you might have had to break it open anyway. The other thing that could have been done, sort of a more recent technique, would be to CT scan the specimen. And so by doing that, as long as there's some density difference between the bones and the material that's kind of surrounding them, you'd be able to say, all right, yes, there is something inside the specimen. And depending on the quality of the scan, potentially like segment out the different parts.
But you wouldn't necessarily like... That's not a normal thing you do with every specimen like that comes in, is it?
Not really, not unless there's a particular reason to have an interest in doing that. So either part of a project trying to get information on the internal structures of a specimen or something like that.
So if a fossil breaks, it seems pretty straightforward on how you fix it because, as you mentioned, things don't come complete and you have to stitch two things together. It's not like Jurassic Park. What about accidentally discarding or overlooking a rare fossil when you're in the field?
In some ways, it's one of the things where you don't necessarily know if you've missed something. In terms of saying, like, how many, like, amazing fossils have I, like, walked over without recognizing, that's something I don't really worry about too much because maybe I've walked over the best fossil ever and maybe I haven't, but there isn't really a way for me to know and sort of go crazy kind of thinking about, oh my God, what have I missed?
Well, that was what I was thinking is like, I think I just mentally am the kind of person who I'd be out there and I'd want to, if you play a video game like Skyrim, you can do everything in the game. You can open everything, you can move everything around. And so every room that you go in, you can get stuck in the same room just because you want to make sure you've turned over every rock and every stone. And so I make no progress in this game at all. I feel like I would be horrible in the field because I'd want to, make sure that you have to like look for everything because there could be a new scientific discovery that is just right over there, but you didn't look hard enough.
Yeah, obviously we try to do as good a job as possible when we're in the field. And when we actually do find something, we can't usually collect everything that we find just for logistical reasons. And so we try to get as much information about every specimen that we find as possible so we can make an informed decision about whether it's something that's worth collecting or not. So we try to be as careful as possible in those circumstances. But the nature of paleontology is that there's things that are not really exposed yet or still buried or that were hidden in the weeds that you just don't see. A good example of that in one sense, a few years ago in our fieldwork in Tanzania, we discovered some fossils from the Middle Permian period of Earth history, so things that are probably about 265 million years old. The reason that we found them is because, A, we sort of got lost and so wandered into an area that we hadn't really looked at before, and B, there had been a wildfire in the area that had burned off a lot of the grass that normally kind of covers the area that we work in. And so the sort of rocks on the ground and kind of potential fossils were better exposed there than they would be normally. So again, our first year in Tanzania, I guess it was an eventful field season. 2007, we were walking along a path going out to some outcrops in the Triassic. So there's middle Triassic rocks are about 240 million years old in Tanzania that produce vertebrate fossils. And so we were on this path out to an area that we wanted to explore. We sort of came to this kind of area where the path was fairly narrow. And on the right side of the path, there was like a little hill that, was not very big, not very tall, but, a little hill. On the path in front of me was a little kind of cylindrical piece of bone that was, maybe like 6 or 8 inches long. And I picked it up and was looking at it, and it wasn't an obvious part of the group of animals that I study. And it's like, okay, kind of like long, thin, cylindrical bone, maybe it's like part of a rib or something. It's probably not very important. And I was about to kind of like throw it off in the weeds because I was like, well, who cares? When Sterling came and was like, hey, Ken, what did you find? And I showed it to him. He's like, whoa, where did you find this? And I was like, what is it? It turned out that it was part of the femur, so the thigh bone, of an animal called a Asilisaurus, which are very close relatives of dinosaurs. They kind of fall just outside of dinosaurs on the Archosaur family tree. And there had never been a Asilisaurus described from Tanzania before. So that was the first Asilisaurus specimen that was ever found. It turns out the little hill on the right side of the trail had the remains of about 15 individuals of that species preserved there. So it's kind of a assemblage mostly of subadult individuals that all sort of became disarticulated. And so there were bits of various parts of their skeletons there. And so we spent like several hours then kind of combing the hillside, picking up all the things that we found. And from that one locality and that kind of one day's collecting, we got almost all of the skeleton of the animal represented. So it was a new species. We named it Asilisaurus congwe, which is kind of a combination of Swahili and Greek. It basically means ancient ancestor lizard.
Oh, cool. That's amazing.
So yeah, I almost threw the like first Asilisaurus femur into the weeds, and kind of all us just marched on without like recognizing what was there.
That there was a major scientific discovery.
Yes.
That's awesome. See, that's exactly what I was like thinking about. Like every potential, like you have to look under every rock or around the ridge.
Yeah, so when we do our field work, our team that works in Tanzania and Zambia includes people that work on most of the main groups of animals that we find there, so that, if somebody finds something and, you don't recognize what it is, hopefully there is someone that will be able to say, oh, yeah, it is this or that, and it's really important, or, yeah, we already have a ton of those, or that's something that's not diagnostic, so...
It seems like when you're in the field, the possibility for error or mistakes is much higher because obviously you can't control things in that setting, and stuff happens and unanticipated events come up. Have there been any mistakes or challenges that you've experienced while conducting field work?
In terms of things that were sort of a little too exciting like that, there's a couple things that come to mind. One was on our first trip, and it was actually like on the first day of the first trip to Tanzania in 2007. So in the morning, we sort of like hike down the path, down the side of the mountain, down to the flat area, do our work, and then at the end of the day, hike back up the escarpment to our village, which, yeah, that's something I never get used to, is that climb up the side of the escarpment. That is not a fun part of the day, especially with like a bag full of rocks on your back.
Oh, man, yeah.
But anyway, so our first day, like first time ever doing this, we're like dragging ourselves up the side of the mountain. A boom slang, which is a little arboreal snake that actually is quite venomous, apparently was crawling around in the tree above the path that we were walking along, and it fell out of the tree onto the path, like literally like just in front of one of my collaborators. I remember Sterling, who's like kind of exhausted from climbing up the mountain, like afterwards, like saying when it happened, he was just like, all right, that's it. This is the end. He was like too tired to even like fight back or anything. But luckily the snake sort of decided it didn't want to bother us and kind of slithered off into the grass. But
wow. Did he know it was a boom slang?
Yes.
Oh, God. I guess that's like probably something you should do before you go filming in places like Tanzania, is like Googling highly venomous snakes that live here.
Yeah, there's a few, like there's a kind of spitting cobra that lives there that we've seen a couple times, but luckily from a distance. But boom slangs are pretty distinctive looking snakes. They have pretty distinctive markings, and they have big eyes and things. So they're actually like very cute. They're pretty like attractive animals, but yeah.
Danger murder noodles.
Yes, there is that aspect to them.
Do things like that ever cross your mind as like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't do field work there because there are lots of venomous snakes, or like, do things like that ever deter you?
Not really. The areas that I at least do field work in are really pretty low key. So yes, there are venomous snakes around, but if you're doing field work in like Utah or Texas or something, there's rattlesnakes and stuff there, and you just do your best to avoid them. One of the areas that we work in Zambia is actually one of the national parks. And so there's like rhinos and elephants and lions and things there. And when we're there, we actually have one of the rangers from the park come with us to help kind of protect us from the animals. But really, we've seen, it's kind of weird in a way. You think of like, documentaries of the African savanna and like animals everywhere. They do a really good job of avoiding us for the most part. Like we hardly ever see any animals around when we're out there. So it feels pretty safe.
Until a tiger jumps out of the grass, or a lion.
Yeah, a lion.
Yeah, not tigers.
There was one of our years camping there were some lions that walked by our camp pretty close by and were roaring, which I found out later when they're roaring, they're usually patrolling their territory and not actively hunting. So I guess that's some consolation. That when you're sitting in your tent and there's like a lion roaring outside, it's kind of an intimidating experience.
Oh, yeah.
On a different trip to that area, we also had an elephant that apparently was like, I guess, upwind of us and didn't really realize we were there. And so it was eating the trees kind of around our camp. Eventually, it got close enough where it realized we were there and started making some pretty unhappy elephant noises and stamping around and things.
Uh-oh.
Luckily, none of us got trampled or anything. But yeah, again, you're sitting in your tent and it's like, oh boy, I can let me try to make myself as small as possible so I don't get stepped on by an elephant.
I mean, it's dangerous work. I don't know. Trying to prepare the next generation of field scientists and...
Honestly, okay, yes, there's venomous snakes. There's animals around in the areas that we work, but I've never felt like in danger or unsafe or anything in the work that we've done. And so maybe I'm naive, but it doesn't seem like it's, true life-threatening things. And
you're not deliberately trying to insert yourself into a dangerous situation. I like the idea of paleontology as like the evergreen field, because as the world changes, so long as you're not like paving over everything, more fossils will be exposed through natural shifts. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really fascinating concept.
Yeah, so there's things, probably some very interesting specimens in areas that I've done field work that haven't eroded out yet. And every time we go back to an area, there's new things that are exposed, and so new potential to find things.
Cool. I like that concept.
Hey everybody, this is Sherry Arasan. I'm a producer here on the show, and this is our segment where we'd like to hear from you, where you are and what it sounds like. I am currently here on Ohio Street Beach in Chicago, Illinois. It is the night of November 15th, 2017. It's about 41 degrees, so pretty chilly, and plus I'm right by the lake, so it's a little bit colder than that too, because I get that nice Chicago wind chill. To my left, I see Lakeshore Drive and the Chicago skyline. With prominently standing out is the John Hancock building, because I'm kind of in the middle of the city right now. As I look to my left, I can see the glow off the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier, and on the beach it is completely empty because it is, as I said, 41 degrees on a Wednesday night. So that's enough for me. Here's what it sounds like on Ohio Street Beach.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this show, please like us and rate us on iTunes. Since we're still pretty new around here, it would really help us out a lot. You can look forward to a new episode every other week in the iTunes store or on our website, explorastory.com. It's all one word. And find us on YouTube at youtube.com/thebrainscoop. Explore a Story is hosted by me, Emily Grassley. Our guest was Field Museum Associate Curator Ken Angielczyk. The show is produced by Brandon Brungard and Sherry Arasan, with music by Jason Widener, and were made possible from support by the Field Museum in Chicago, Illinois.